So now we're going to talk about my green screen setup. So let's just get into that now. So I've changed my setup quite a bit from what I've talked about in the past. So the videos from 2020 and 2021 are kind of irrelevant for the most part now because my setup for the green screen has changed quite a lot. So I'm going to talk about that now. So as far as the main camera goes, this is my main camera, which is the camcorder. For a while, I switched to using the camcorder for my whiteboard as part of that setup, but now I use the camcorder as the main camera again for this. And that's primarily because it works really well with green screen keying. It does a pretty good job. The thing with my old phone, which is what I used to use with this, is it kind of struggles in some areas, like with white balance and overall brightness level and focus. It sometimes struggles a little bit with that. This is what I was using for the green screen camera in the past. Then I was using my camcorder as the main talking head at one point. But now I use the camcorder for both. And the way I accomplish that is I create a group in OBS, which allows me to have a keyed camera and an unkeyed camera at the same time. That's why I was originally using two cameras. One of them was keyed out, which was this one. That one was not keyed out, and it looked exactly like this while I was doing the talking head. Now I have the ability to do both. So I brought my camera count down to 2. I used to have 3 cameras. 2 for this. So I had the main view in front of the green screen. I had this for when I actually key things out in the first place. And then I had my webcam or that at one point as well for the whiteboard. But my webcam was what I was using at one point. Then I switched to the camcorder. Now the camcorder is used for this. A little bit confusing. I'll try to sum up what exactly I'm using at the end after I'm done rambling. So I now use the camcorder as the green screen camera. And normally my background when I'm doing talking head is just this plain green screen. And this isn't actually going to be used for most of my videos, but I'm using it for this particular one. So so I use one less camera as far as the phone goes. And because of that, I now have the power strip again. You might remember that I had a power strip on top of my desk if you watched the behind the scenes 2020 video. That was so I could plug in my camcorder because the cord is very short. And I could plug in all the lights easily too through that power strip. And I like the other system because when I had the camcorder by the whiteboard over there, I didn't have to use that power strip, but now I'm using it again. But the fact that I only have to use one camera now is worth that trade-off. So it's actually more efficient to do things this way now. And everything's 60 frames per second as well, which I also like. Even the camera itself is. So that's pretty cool. Because I can now capture that through a capture card, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So now I use the camcorder for this as well as the overlay in general, which is like this. But I'll be in the bottom left normally. But my overlay is like this with the camcorder. I can come back to here and do this as needed, and of course switch to the whiteboard, which I don't have out right now. But that is part of the setup too. So yeah, I use the power strip now that I use a camcorder, but it's worth the trade-off. So as far as my computer screen goes, I just mirror it to my cam link, which is what I use to capture the screen. And I have one hooked up to the actual monitor, and one hooked up to the cam link so that I can capture it with the Intel NUC which is my secondary PC that I prefer to use for capturing stuff. Because then I can zoom in with glass brick and whatnot, which is quite handy. Looks like I don't have that enabled right now. But no problem, I can quickly enable it. So I can zoom in like this and still be able to see myself in the corner. So I can tell am I overlaying stuff or what's happening. It's really nice for that. So that's why I use the capture system. And then a USB port did provide more power, as I've mentioned in the past. Because when I was charging this thing, this was actually discharging faster than it was charging previously. Now that I use the Nook, which has a charging port, this thing charges faster when I have it hooked up to that port specifically. But now that I don't use this, that's kind of irrelevant now. I just tend to get more benefit when I use my Intel Nook to capture everything rather than this computer that you're seeing on here. And that is exactly what I'm doing right now. So, yeah, the display is hooked up to my monitor, then I mirror that display to the cam link, which is not what I'm doing right now because I have multiple computers hooked up to the capture card. That's a different setup than what I normally would use. But when I'm not switching between multiple computers like that, then I mirror to the cam link. So that's pretty handy. So regarding the whiteboard camera, that used to be on the other side of the room, but now I actually have the whiteboard right on my desk. So I'm talking about my setup right now. Once I talk about it, I'll show some actual footage so you can see what stuff looks like. But I want to talk through it first. I should probably be in this view instead. But yeah, I'm going to talk through everything first. So I have the tripod right next to my desk now, which used to be on the other side of the room. And of course I use that vise to hold the whiteboard in place. And I also use some fabric thing to basically give it some give with that mini vise that I have, which will be shown on the footage. And since I have it on the edge of my desk, the vise slides real easily even if I have it all the way tight. But if I put something underneath the platform, which just extends the platform, like a Google Play card, for example, then it creates a much better surface so it doesn't slide as easily. You'll see that on the actual footage in a little bit. But that's how I have the whiteboard up. I actually have it right on my desk now, which is quite nice. And I'm now in this format in front of the whiteboard too. So the whiteboard is the background when I have it switched to that. And I can be in front of the whiteboard and point at it like the weatherman, which is quite handy. I used to only have it fill up part of the screen, but now it fills up the entire screen so I can point anywhere on the whiteboard. Either this way, or now that I'm next to it, I can do it in front of the actual whiteboard camera too. But I'm going to try to point to this as much as I can. So, hopefully I didn't mess up my lighting just now. I think we're okay. I bumped one of my lights, which I'll talk about in a second. But now that I'm using the whiteboard, everything's on my desk, of course, and I would normally erase using the towel, which I've been doing for a while. But since it takes a while to erase, and it's a little bit hard to hold the whiteboard with the vise and stuff, I now don't erase on camera, and instead do my famous snap transition, like the way I segued into this segment of the casual video, if you're watching that whole thing. If you're just watching the excerpt, you probably didn't see that part. But the way I erase a whiteboard now sort of goes like this. I'll pull up the footage so you can see what I mean by the snap transition. So this is what the snap transition looks like. Why don't we erase the whiteboard, huh? Alright, so I'm not 100% sure exactly what approach I want to use for this. So So yeah, that's my approach for erasing the whiteboard. I figure it's kind of a fun way to do it. And it just saves a lot of time as well. I'm probably not going to take that much time to even do the snap transition in the future when I get used to it. It'll probably be more like this. I'll probably do a very quick snap in the future when I get better at doing it in the first place. So that's pretty much how everything is regarding the whiteboard. So now I'm going to talk about the peripherals and how I have all that stuff hooked up, because that's also changed a fair bit. So essentially what I have is a USB hub, which is essentially a 4-port USB-A female to a 1-port USB-A male. So it basically converts one USB port into 4 ports. And I have the kind of adapter that doesn't use external power. So all the power comes from one port as a result. It's not this adapter right here, which has the USB-C at the end, but it's another one that's got USB-A instead. It's from Anker, just like this one. Hashtag not sponsored. But I hooked that up to the Intel NUC had a charging port, which is just a USB port that outputs more power than all the other ports do. And I hook up the USB hub to that charging port just because it has the most power. And since all the power is coming from one port, I want to have as much power as possible. So I have a 4-port USB hub hooked up to the charging ports nowadays. And within that USB hub, I got 3 things hooked up to that. I have my USB keyboard adapter that you will see on the footage, but it's a thing that came with my Steam Link. And I have that inside my desk, and I now use that to hook up the webcam for the whiteboard. So what I normally use for my keyboard so that the receiver is close, so it doesn't cause wireless interference, I could actually show what the adapter looks like. So this adapter came with my Steam controller. It's basically a micro USB female to USB-A female. And you can see I got my keyboard and mouse receiver right in there. And when I'm actually using my setup, I now have my Logitech camera hooked up to this adapter, which is right underneath my desk. But that ultimately goes to one of the ports on the USB hub. So we're chaining a lot of adapters here. So the webcam goes to here, micro USB cable goes to that USB hub, which then goes to the official USB port. And that works great. So I'm going to hook that back up real quick to the micro USB. So that's what one of the ports is on the USB hub. Another port is for the cam link, which is what I use to capture the computer that I'm actually recording on. It's what you saw earlier right here. I use the cam link to capture this right there. So that goes into a port on the USB hub as well. And I use the longer adapter that comes with it. It's a USB-A male to female, which is sort of just an extension cable. So I have that hooked up there for more room and stuff. Then of course I have the Stream Deck hooked up to there as well. I could probably do a quick little demonstration real quick. If I could even get it working. See if my setup is fancy enough for me to be able to do that right now. Okay, here we go. So, sorry about the lag right there. Usually there's not lag, but just deal with it for right now. That's the wireless. This is being streamed wirelessly from my phone. So the Stream Deck allows me to control pretty much everything. So if I want to switch to my screen, there we go. If I want to switch back, there we go. So I can control pretty much everything that you would normally see with the Stream Deck right there. And then to shut off the phone screen, It's a little bit convoluted, but I'm still getting things figured out regarding this particular setup. So the Stream Deck allows me to do pretty much anything related to the video and what you see. It's nice compared to just using a bunch of keyboard shortcuts. So that's hooked up to one of the ports on that USB hub as well. So that's everything I have hooked up to the USB hub. I would hook up more stuff to it, but I try to minimize what I hook up to it just because of the power draw. If you draw too much power, the USB devices will all become unreliable. And the way this camera was really choppy, that's exactly what will end up happening with my general cameras. Not because of wireless, but because of the power draw. So I minimize what I hook up to that. I basically hook up the things that draw the least amount of power to that USB hub. So then the other peripherals I've hooked up to it are a mouse, which is just a USB 2 extension cord with USB-A. I have the mouse receiver hooked up to there. I actually use Barrier normally, which allows you to use the same keyboard and mouse between multiple computers. So obviously my main computer that I use right here. And then this is the Nook, which normally you won't see on a recording, but this is the computer that I'm actually recording from. So that computer records this computer. And I normally don't even bother hooking up a mouse to that computer because I could just use Barrier, which allows me to use the same keyboard and mouse across multiple computers. But it is nice to have backup just because I have 2 keyboards and mice on my desk right now. You may or may not have seen it with the camera view earlier, but for that reason, I usually don't hook up the second keyboard and mouse, but it's nice to have it as backup. I have it hooked up right now, even though I probably don't need it. So the other front port of the Nook is used for that. And then the actual capture card that I use to capture the camera now is a Mirrorbox capture card. It kind of looks a little weird. It looks like a cabana type thing, like you'd use in the forest or whatever. It's kind of a weird design. Just look up Mirrorbox. It's got a really weird design overall. But that's what I use to capture this now. I was previously using an analog capture card, but I now switched to digital with HDMI, which gives me slightly more clarity than I used to have with this camera. That's why I would use this camera for the longest time for this purpose, by the way. But now that I have slightly more clarity and also 60 frames per second, I now use it that way with the Mirrorbox capture card. And I'll explain why I'm using that instead of the Camlink later on. But the Mirrorbox does a pretty good job with this, as you can see. So I have that hooked up not to the USB hub just because I care about reliability. And using a USB hub is just generally going to be a little bit less reliable, especially if there's more power draw. Most of the time it won't be a problem, but if there is, I hooked up what I'd rather have problematic first. So this camera, for example, I don't have that hooked up to the USB hub because I don't want that to be a problem if the USB hub glitches out because of too much power draw or something. So I had that hooked up to a separate port on the actual Nook. I also have the microphone hooked up to the Nook as well because I just don't want to have reliability issues with that either, since I can't actually tell whether there's reliability issues or not. I have that hooked up there too. The microphone is now USB, so I have it somewhat digital now. It currently uses I can even get this opened for the USB hub. I'm using one of these adapters right here, which converts 3.5 millimeter microphone and headphone to USB. And I have a 12 or 13 foot USB extension cable for USB-A. And I have one of these hooked up to there. I have it clipped on my pants using one of these binder things right here, which is quite handy. So that's how I have the microphone right now. And I just wear a clip-on mic, which is what I'm doing right now. So that's how I do my microphone now. I switched away from complete analog because it gives a lot of static, and to be honest, the cord was quite a hassle to deal with. But this is far less of a hassle since it just goes to USB. It works on whatever device. It does have increased latency compared to just using the built-in 3.5 millimeter port on the computer. But I think USB is the reason why that latency happens. And it's not really that much of a problem because my cameras also use USB and it has that same kind of latency, so it really doesn't matter. It's the same sort of latency. It all works out. So one of the things about the MirrorBox is it has increased latency compared to the Camlink, but it all works out because you can change the synchronization offset in OBS, for example, if it's out of sync. But this is actually not really out of sync for me, I don't think. Let me know if my audio's out of sync. But I never made any adjustments, so it just wasn't necessary. So yeah, I use the MirrorBox for the camera that you're seeing right now. And then I use the Camlink for the computer screen, which is kind of backwards of how it should be. But later on I'll explain sort of why I'm doing it this way. Mainly because I have a Camlink and I just wanted another capture card that's budget. But there's also another significant reason which I'll go over later. So yeah, the MirrorBox is connected to a normal USB port and not a hub, just because I care about reliability. Same with that microphone stuff that I just showed you a little bit ago. I should probably reclip it because it's falling off. I may end up doing some mic drops today. We'll have to wait and see. But then for my display right now, I don't normally connect the second monitor to the Nook, but when I do, I use a Thunderbolt HDMI adapter like this one. That's what I'm doing right now, so I can easily see everything with the OBS preview. But normally if I'm just recording from one computer, I'm not going to do that. I'll just mirror to the monitor and Camlink. But this works pretty well. Then of course I have Ethernet hooked up to it as well, and the main monitor with the native HDMI port on the Nook, which is an 8th generation i5 in case you were wondering. But that's pretty much everything that's involved with my setup nowadays. Like I said, I created a nested layer for OBS so I could apply a green screen key to that, but not have it affect my original source, which is what gives me the capability to do this with the same exact camera. I don't need two separate cameras for that now. So that's pretty handy. So that's why I have an OBS group. I just apply the green screen filter to that group rather than the actual source. And it allows me to do what I just showed you. So one other thing I will mention since last time is I did actually end up getting a 6-foot cable for my phone. My microphone fell off again. Sorry about that. This is the 6-foot micro USB cable right here, which is a little bit hard to see because the camera has manual focus. But Yeah, so this was long enough for me to extend the cable. You might remember in the past when I was using my phone as a camera with Droid Cam, I was using this to give myself enough length. I did end up getting this. It's an Anker one as well. I'll try to put links in the description for everything I got. So that's pretty much my setup now. As far as the lighting, I changed that quite a bit. You'll get to see that on the footage, but I have a light right on the desk, which is why that happens, because without it, everything's just kind of dark in my opinion. That was one of the problems I was having in my videos before. Everything just felt a little bit dark and uneven, and I figure a light like this helps just a little bit. I don't have it aiming directly at me, but it adds just a little bit more light. I think it gives a nice effect, so why not do that? And then I have some green screen lights. I did mention how I used my clamp lamp in the past, which can clamp onto a surface directly. I did mention how I used to have that aiming the green screen and stuff. That's no longer the case. My big lamps that diffuse the most are now both used for the green screen. And I actually have my bedside right here because it's a nice surface to set those lamps on. And have them both kind of facing the opposite way with the green screen, which helps diffuse the lighting a little bit. The lighting really isn't the most even, as you can see right here. It's not the most even lighting in the world, but it is good enough to get a relatively decent key. I honestly just worked with what I had. I didn't get any special equipment to get good green screen lighting. I just used what I already had, because you don't have to go crazy and get like a $200 Elgato key light. Is that even what the price is? I honestly don't know. I think it's pretty expensive though. I'm just using lamps that I already happen to have, and that works pretty well, as you can see here. I know the keying doesn't look the greatest for certain parts of it, but that's actually more my camcorder rather than the lighting itself. It used to look a lot better when I used my phone, but this still looks pretty good even with this type of lighting. So I'm still going to go with the camcorder because it does a pretty good job. It does a better job when it comes to white balance and just exposure related stuff overall. So that's why I'm using that now instead of this thing, which I used to use as a camera. Camera is pretty good, but I'm preferring that one. So yeah. So why don't I show you the actual footage now so we can talk about that. So I'll show you some footage of what the actual setup looks like now. So let's pull that up real quick. So this is kind of what my setup looks like overall now. So see how I have my bedside right there with lamps just on top of that. I actually used to use my hamper as a surface to set the lamp on, but that was quite inconvenient. It might sound like bringing my bedside over is quite a hassle, but it's not nearly as much of a hassle as you would think. It is so much less of a hassle than even using my hamper. So I'm going to take this since it's a nice surface to set both things, and I'm not bringing a stool in here or anything. I know that the lights should probably be a little bit higher ideally, but this actually works quite well. I also have a 6500K color temperature on my ceiling light too, which helps a little bit, I think, when I shut it off. That actually still has pretty decent keying even with that. It probably adds a bit more grain. Yeah, you can see grain in that corner because the video's paused, so it shouldn't be actively moving. But when it's in front of a video like this, it actually doesn't look all that bad. But I have that 6500K color temperature, which I think makes the lighting pretty decent for this. So yeah, I just have the lamps on the bedside, and I have the cords over to the left so that it's not always getting in my way. You can see my power strip right there. And I used to have a Carmex that separated from the desk because they're both made of metal, I think. And I wasn't sure if it would like short out or something, but I don't use the Carmex to separate it anymore because it isn't a problem. I've confirmed that it's not a problem. So you can see I have a tripod right there, which is just right next to me over here. And the whiteboard is on this side of my up desk, which is quite handy because I can reach it over here nicely. You can see I have a mini vise. I just randomly received it as a gift, and I was like, that could actually be useful for the whiteboard. So I do have a very good use for that mini vise right there. And that orange rag thing that you see is to give it a lot of give, because the whiteboard actually has a dent inside of it because I never used that orange thing there before. But now that I do, it's a lot better. I usually have the marker right on my desk too, since I'm always on the desk anyway. And yeah, you can see kind of how I have my green screen set up. I do it pretty much like how I've always done it. I use the chair to balance it on this side. I also have it more horizontal rather than vertical, which gives me more keying. So yeah, then I have this actual stand, which of course I have right here. That's where it is in the real room right now. But that holds the other end of the green screen. And I have it relatively level. It's not 100%, but who cares? And yeah, I know the keying isn't really perfect around my hair and stuff, but it is pretty decent that I would still consider using it, of course. It really doesn't have to be that perfect, honestly, but I think it still does a pretty decent job overall. Especially when I'm in front of a white background. It actually looks better in front of a white background than a darker background. When I used my phone in the past as a camera, it actually looked worse with a white background in some cases. But with this camera, it looks better, which is interesting. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next part. So obviously I have the webcam on the tripod now, which is facing the whiteboard pretty much parallel. And the whiteboard encapsulates the whole view. Actually, it doesn't with the camera itself, but I cropped the view in OBS so it looks real nice and full screen. And I still have plenty of room to write stuff too. So that could be pretty handy. So as you can see right behind the vise, I have that Google Play card underneath there so that the surface doesn't keep sliding on this Updesk surface, which is quite nice. And you can see I have my eraser right there too. And once again, pretty much everything you see here is stuff I already had. I just got creative and worked with what I already had because I don't really need to get fancy. I'm just an amateur, so this works pretty well. So yeah, that's how the lamps are placed. They all have a USB port, but that's pretty handy. And then you can see how I have this clamp lamp right here. I used to have that facing the green screen because that's all I needed back then, especially when I did the sit down format in the past casual videos. I don't know if that's exactly publicly available. I think I'm just going to probably create some more excerpts of that eventually, which may already exist when you're watching this. But yeah, that just adds a little bit more light to me. Because again, without it, everything just looks a little bit dark. I mean, it'll work, but I like having a little bit more light, which is quite nice. I like having a little bit more glow, as it were. But, yeah, so you can see my OBS window right there. Normally I don't have the OBS window on full screen. I have other things on that monitor too. Like right now I have some notes. I also have an Explorer window so I can make sure that files on the hard drive load quickly, since in the past I had some videos not saved to disk correctly, even though the OBS preview is working just as good as this. And I lost multiple hours worth of footage, essentially, on one of the casual videos, unfortunately. But I also discovered files on the hard drive were loading very slowly. And now I just have it load a lot. I mean, I just have an Explorer window to make sure all my files are loading quickly. Which should mean that the file's getting correctly saved to disk. Just a quick little test that I like to do. So I have a whole bunch of different windows open on the right monitor. The left monitor is really where all the magic happens with content. So, yeah. So I don't really have much on the left monitor right now. But this was taken after I recorded the video, when I was testing the setup. So that's what my camcorder looks like. I'm actually using my hamper cover as a platform, which I set on top of both monitors. It's quite handy for that. I could just set the camcorder right on there. I actually used to set this thing right on top of there too. And I had this little clamp thing which held it in place. It's a caddy, which is originally meant to be used for the iPad if I want to use that as a teleprompter. But I have the clamp thing on it, which allows me to sort of create a makeshift mini tripod, which is shown in the behind the scenes 2020 video. So yeah. So that's the... I can see it right now. It pretty much looks exactly like that. So that's the screen where all the magic happens. And I keep a marker right there so it's always handy. And then power strip. We just saw that right there. Power strip has the camcorder plugged into it, as well as all the lamps that I'm using. So it's quite handy for that. The cords aren't even in the way right now. I can go all the way across my room currently, and none of the cords are in the way, which never used to be as much of a possibility. So, yeah. And then as far as the keyboard interface where I have the webcam hooked up, that's at my desk. It was kind of hard to see. Didn't have the best angle for that. I don't think it's on the screen right now. Yeah, so that's the adapter that I previously showed you. But that's where the whiteboard camera is now hooked up, which is hooked up to the USB hub, ultimately. So that's kind of the capture computer right there, which is an Intel NUC. And that's pretty much exactly how it is right now, as you could imagine. So the front left port, I just have a keyboard and mouse extension cable. The right port is that charging port that provides more power. And the hub is somewhere right, probably where my finger is actually. And that antenna, where my finger is on now, that's actually an antenna for my main computer. And it always got in the way, so I recently put it inside my computer. Not relevant to the setup, but it's inside my computer case now, and it's still hooked up, so I have Wi-Fi. Without that antenna, Wi-Fi just doesn't happen at all on this computer. On the Intel Nook, it happens big time though. Doesn't need any special antennas. Technology must have got better since then or something. Well, it's just the way PCI Wi-Fi cards work, I'm not even sure. But then I got the mirror box connected to the back port, which is roughly about there, as well as a microphone. Then HDMI is connected to the Thunderbolt port, as well as a built-in HDMI port, which is actually right there. Ethernet's right there, and power is over on the left. Not left, this is actually the right there. So that's, it looks way messier now than it did right there, because my current setup for what I'm actually trying to record is far more complex than what I typically do. So those cables right there, multiply it by about 2 or 3. Probably somewhere close to there, I'm not even sure. So yeah, that's pretty much my setup in a nutshell. I normally have a drawer right there, but I like to take it out of my desk if I need more height for stuff like this. It's really easy to take out of my desk. And that's exactly what I've done right now. So my desk actually has some holes in it. Oh, and you can also see I have a pen right there, which tilts the camera so that it's down towards me since I'm embarrassingly short. Try to hide that in videos as much as possible, but yeah. So it gives me adjustment for the right height. And that's how the tripod is configured to aim towards the whiteboard. And then, yeah, I guess that's how the lamps are placed. You can see there's quite a bit of room on the surface. And that other chair that you see right there is actually kind of irrelevant now. I used to use it to kind of support the green screen, but now I balance it just right on the other chair, which that's the wheel for the other chair. I balance the green screen just right now, and it doesn't even matter. So yeah, that's my actual setup more or less nowadays. So that's basically what my actual setup is now. So there's an updated setup. Hopefully it stays at this, because this is actually quite ideal compared to how I used to have the setup for these kind of videos. So yeah, if you're watching the excerpt, then if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to let me know. I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for watching and have a good one. Peace.